I was born the youngest of three children. My sister, she died when she was 9. My mother, she was a very good person. She was the religious person. She was the one that kept the family unit together. She made sure us kids went to church and Sunday school regular and got baptized and confirmed and all this stuff. And she was just kind of the fixer. My dad, on the other hand, he was a drunk. And I wish I could tell you that I have some good memories about my dad. But the most vivid memory I have is fear and being scared. My dad was the type of drunk that when he came home, no matter what time from the bar, whether it be 7 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock, he expected supper on the table. And it better be something that he liked. And I can remember one night he come home and a big fight started between him and my mother. And the table got turned over and the dishes got broke. And my brother and I, we ran upstairs because we was scared. And a little bit later, my mom came up. And she said, just go to sleep, that it'll be all right tomorrow morning when you wake up. That Dad really didn't mean anything by it. And that's kind of the way it was. You know, she was a prime candidate, my mom, for Al-Anon. You know, everything would be better tomorrow. And as most of us know that's been in the vicious circle of alcoholism, that tomorrow's never better. It's just like today. But somehow in that, on February 10th, 1960, my thinking, what happened that day, was going to affect my thinking for many years to come. My dad got up to go to work that morning, and he went out to scrape the ice off the windshield, and he came back in and he told my mom that he wasn't feeling very well. They took him to the hospital, and that was the last time I seen my dad alive. He was 40 years old. I was 5, my brother was 15. Although on his death certificate, his cause of death is cardiac arrest, the people that knew him knew that his lifestyle probably contributed to his early death. But I didn't realize how much that was going to affect me for the next few years. And somewhere between 5 and 8, I think I had what I guess was somewhat of a normal childhood. But I'd started school naturally at 5, going to kindergartner. And I was getting that group of friends that we all get when we start school in elementary. And I was also recognizing some things that wasn't very healthy. And them are the things that I seemed to dwell on. I was noticing that some of the friends that I ran around with, their dad would go to Cub Scout meetings with them. And their dad would take them hunting. And their dad would take them fishing. And so on. And poor me, I didn't have that. I didn't have that person in my life. I was already sucking into that. And I knew how to use it real well. At the age of 8, like I said, my brother was 10 years older than myself. He got married, so he moved out of the house. So that left me by myself. My mom had bought a grocery store after my father died to support the family. And it was hard work and it required many hours. So I'd come home from school and nobody'd be there. I'd be by myself. And I'd get up to go to school and nobody'd be there. So that feeling of loneliness came to me real early in life. And I didn't like it. And I guess my mom kind of recognized this. And she had talked to my grandma, and she lived in the same town. And somewhat they decided that maybe it'd be better if I just kind of stayed with Grandma. That when I got out of school, I'd have somebody to go home to. And I could kind of be her friend and she could be mine. And I thought that was a pretty good deal. That kind of worked. I'd come home from school and Grandma would have these homemade cookies made and the house would be full of, that homemade bread smell and cheese and all this. And it worked out good. She had chickens, and I'd go out and do chores, and she heated with coal and cobs. And that was my job every night after school. I'd go in and get coals and cob, to heat the next day. And I felt good about that. It gave me a purpose. But along with this, my grandma was an old hard German. And her and her brother made home brew. And they made good home brew, and they made lots of it. And their specialty was homemade choke cherry wine. And I mean, they made gallons of this stuff. They'd give it away to friends and family. And every year it would carry over because they could never drink and give away as much as they made. Grandma had an old cave out behind her house, and that's where they always kept it. So somewhere along when I was about the age of 10, it was on the summer, real hot day, and I went down to that cave. It was nice and cool down there. And I went down to that cave, and I seen all this homemade wine up there. And I cracked one of them seals, and I kind of tasted it. And my God, that stuff tasted like Kool-Aid to a 10-year-old kid. And I drank a little more, and I drank a little more, and obviously I drank too much. But I put that lid back on, and I felt good in that cool cave. And I remember walking up out of that stairs and opened up the door, and that hot sun hit me. And holy smokes, I was off to the races. For the first time in quite a few years, it didn't make no difference if I didn't have a dad in my life. It didn't make no difference if I had nobody to take me hunting, fishing, and so on. God, I could be anybody I wanted to with that feeling. And I look back on that even today, and I think all the way through my drinking career, I hunted for that first feeling again because I loved the effects of what that alcohol done to me at the age of 10. The next couple years, I made a lot of trips down in that cellar. And I didn't understand any of this at the time, but my tolerance for alcohol was getting even higher back then already, even when I was 12 years old. And somewhere around that time, I heard my grandma, I overheard a conversation that she was having with one of her friends, and I heard her say that her brother, Uncle Timmy, the one that always helped her make this, that by God, she thought Timmy was drinking a little more than he used to because she was noticing some of this wine disappearing. I thought, oh boy, now Uncle Timmy ain't drinking no more. I knew where that wine was going. So I think at that time I learned how to be a heck of a con and manipulate myself with alcohol. Because I found that I could go down to that cellar and I could drink about half of this choke cherry wine. I could fill it back up with water, reseal it, and this stuff was so deadgum strong that when they tasted, they didn't even know it was diluted. So I had a pretty good thing going on there for a while. Uncle Timmy was getting blamed for it. Hell, I was still drinking. At the age of 13, I had my first run-in with the law. I got for public intoxication. It was no big deal, but it is when you're age of 13. But, they at that time, the county sheriff just kind of gave me a lecture. He called my mom. She came over and got me. And a couple days later, I went in front of this juvenile judge, and he kind of scolded me. And I'm sure that everybody in general probably thought that they had scared me enough that I probably wouldn't be any more trouble. But something had happened when I came home that day. It was like a divided line from that part on in my life. At the age of 13, I lived in a small town, and it was just kind of like it was divided. You had them parents that told their kids, there's no way I want to see you running around with Mark. He's already been in trouble, and he's got a bad attitude. And then there was this other certain amount of kids that was flocking around me saying, geez, what was it like being in jail? You know? And of course, I'm sure I really bragged that up, you know, just like a cop movie, you know. Did you get fingerprinted? Well, heck no, they didn't fingerprint, but I don't know what I told them, but I was getting attention, you know. And that's what I wanted. Even though it was negative, I was getting attention. And I won't go into every drunk-a-log, but I will tell you, between the ages of 13 and 16, I was popped 7 times for either minor in possession, public intoxication, breaking and entering, fighting. I was thrown in jail. I was sent to reform school for a scare tactic. I was kicked out of school. I was threatened to send to Boys Town. And you know, none of them scared me enough. None of that scared me enough to stay away from alcohol. Also, about that time, I started running around with a much older crowd. People that was old enough to buy. They thought it was pretty neat when we'd go fishing, and I loved it because I had people to do stuff with. But we'd go fishing, and they'd buy beer, and I could drink beer to beer with these people that was 25, 30 years old. Once again, I was getting attention, and they would tell their buddy, and they'd tell their buddy, and right on down the line. And pretty soon, I had a pretty good reputation. It wasn't good, but I had a reputation. And one of these older fellows that I was running around with quite a bit at that time, he knew these 3 sisters. And we was kind of at a local hangout, and I was one that I never thought much of cars, but I always had fancy motorcycles. I always had new motorcycles, and I always kept them shiny, and I had a lot of chrome on them. And there was some reasoning for that. Number one, girls liked it. You know, it got me a lot of attention. Number two, back in the late 60s, early 70s, if you rode a motorcycle, you was probably labeled a hellraiser. And that was okay with me. You know, that was okay with me. My sophomore year in school, and probably to my knowledge, I may be the only one to stay in Nebraska, I don't know. I know I was the only one in the school district. But instead of people getting out on work release when they was in trouble, I got out on school release. You know, I had a deputy sheriff bring me to school at 8 o'clock in the morning. He'd come pick me up at 3:30 in the afternoon. And the kids would say, well, what's it like in jail? No problem. You do 30 days standing on your head, you know. And I learned not to show fear, because the places I was at that time, they didn't always have juveniles and adults mixed, you know, separated. So I showed, you know, I learned it quick in life that you didn't show fear. Because if you showed fear, they used you. You know, you had to act just as tough and rough as you could. And that way people left you alone. But getting back to these 3 sisters that I met that night through this older gentleman, there was one that kind of caught my eye that night. And believe it or not, she thought I was a jerk. My God. But her sister kind of liked me. Yeah. So in order to get to this one, I kind of went out with the sister. That was okay with me. And that didn't last long, but I think if any of you heard my wife's story, she says that she kind of looked at me as being a challenge. She had a challenge. But the funny part of it is that I guess I kind of looked at her to be a challenge too, if the truth was made. Because I had ran with the type of crowd and associated with that type of people that usually I didn't get turned down. And I'm not bragging about this, that's just the way it was back then. But with the crowd that I ran with. And anyway, I guess she didn't realize how good a con and manipulator I really was. And a few months later, I took her out for a date. And there was something different about this girl. I couldn't get anywhere. And, you know, instead of notching on your gun holster, you know, I couldn't have no notch. And that wasn't good for me, because after all, I had a reputation to uphold. But somewhere in there, through my charming manipulating and conning, after about 7 months of going out, we was both 16, she came up to me one night and she says, "Mark," she says, "I think I'm pregnant." Oh my God. Now what are we going to do? Well, she come from an alcoholic house and she wasn't real happy where she was at, and she says, well, I suppose we're going to get married. Oh my God. We decided, well, we better go tell my mom first. She was a pretty understanding lady. So we went down, we talked to my mom, and God bless her, she was a very understanding lady, you know. She said, the only thing I remember about that conversation was that she says, "Don't you know when you play with fire you get burnt?" And she also told us, she said that she didn't have no money to help us. And, you know, I'm glad she said that today. But I think deep down inside, my mom thought, well, you know, maybe somebody else can raise her kid and do a better job. And I guess she thought Char could probably do that. Now, the other half of this story, when we went to her folks, wasn't so pretty. And it wasn't so easy. Like I said, I had a motorcycle, I had long hair. Her mom worked at this department store, and she knew a lot of people through this place. And she started asking people about my name. And my name wasn't good around. So she never heard anything good. And when her daughter told her that she was pregnant by me, it didn't go over good. And they fought it for a while, and eventually, I guess 3 months later, we ended up getting married. Still 16, we had our first child, a daughter. And I got a job right away. That's one thing that, through my addiction of alcohol, that I always did work. And I used that excuse many times because I'd like to compare myself to people that didn't work. I justified my actions. But I worked hard at this job. It's kind of a crazy job, but I worked myself up on the ladder, and in a couple years, at the age of 18, I was foreman, and I was lead man, and I was bossing people around that was a lot older than me, and that did a lot for my self-worth. At 18, we had our second daughter at the age 18 in January. And I guess them first couple, 2-3 years, you know, it was kind of fun. There was a lot of good times in there. Our house was always kind of the hangout house. The guys would come over and we'd play poker. We'd watch football. But I think Char was pretty content because at least I was home. You know, she knew where I was at. And for some ungodly reason, back then, Nebraska decided to change the drinking law for a few years, and they lowered it to 19. And my God, June 2nd, I turned 19. And I could go to the bar for the first time and drink like the big boys. And I took full advantage of that. And it wasn't so bad right at first, but eventually I found that I myself every night stopping for one or two after work and then going home instead of going home first. And eventually there got to be a couple more and a couple more. Well, I'm no rocket scientist, but I liked what happened at the bar. I really did love the bar scene. I loved the loud music. I was a great snooker player. And I could go into a bar with a couple bucks, and I could come out of there just drunker than heck. We'd play for drinks. And that appealed to me. I also liked the crowd scene at the bar. You know, there was always women there. There was a lot of fun, laughter. And me being a clown and liking to tell jokes, I got a lot of attention that way. On the other hand, here was home. I'd come home after having a little fun, and my wife had been home with 2 kids, and she didn't have that same sense of humor. You know, she'd be all stressed out, and she would start nagging. And, you know, like I say, I'm no rocket scientist, but it didn't take me long to figure out bar fun, home boring, bar fun, home boring. You know, and that's kind of the way my thinking was. Somewhere along about 1977, my life changed again. My wife had ran into an old friend of hers that she had went to school with, and I guess they'd got to talking. And this gal knew a little bit about this program called Al-Anon. And she had talked my wife into maybe going to a meeting or so. And I think she went just long enough to be dangerous. Yeah. And I say this with some laughter now that I got into this program of Alcoholics Anonymous with Al-Anon brutality, and I mean it. Long about 77, I was 22, 23 years old, and like I say, we had 2 daughters, and I'd switched jobs. And I'd worked my way up at that job, too. And I was foreman over a maintenance crew. And we had several $1 million worth of equipment. And it required me long hours. And I didn't mind that. Because I had the type of boss that you didn't drink between 7 and 4, but he didn't care if you worked till midnight and you could drink. And that went along with me. So I spent a lot of time out to work and getting drunk. And like I say, my wife was going to these Al-Anon meetings. I didn't know nothing about it at the time, but I came home from one of my weekend benders, and I'll never forget this because it was on a Sunday night in the wintertime. It was cold. And it was about 10 o'clock at night, and I thought I was doing pretty good coming home at 10. And got out of my pickup, and I went up to the house, and the door was locked. And that had never happened before. And we had this pretty good-sized window in the outside door, and I beat on that dang door, and pretty soon the light came on, and Char come walking in. I could see her walking through the living room. I thought, she's coming to the door. She's going to let me in. And she started saying, I could see her lips moving. I couldn't hear her. I'm on the outside, man. I mean, all the way across the living room. I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble now. So she gets up to the window, and I could hear what she was saying. She says, hey, she says, you're going to call Alcoholics Anonymous. Ooh. And we kind of bickered back and forth for a while. But she had the upper hand because I was on the wrong side of the door and it was cold. Well, once again, my best thinking. I look at my watch, 10 o'clock, Sunday night. I'm thinking, now you AAs probably work this job from 8 to 5. It's Sunday night, 10 o'clock. I'm sure we can call this number, and nobody's going to answer. If I just agree, I can get inside where it's warm. Yeah, honey, we'll make that phone call. Boy, the old door unlocked, and in I come. I thought that was probably going to be the end of it. No. I don't remember to this day, and I don't know if she does, who actually dialed that number, but I know she had it. And that phone rang, and it was up to my ear, and it only rang twice, and the guy answered it. And my God, did my life change. And we talked for quite a while, but there was only a couple things I remember him asking me. And one of them, he asked me, he says, do you think you have a drinking problem? And I really wanted to say, no, I have a wife problem. But she's standing about this far away from the phone, and she's giving me that Al-Anon look. You've all seen it. You've been there. I can tell. Yeah, you've been there. I was getting that look. So I says, yeah, I guess maybe I do have a drinking problem. He says, well, there's a meeting tomorrow night. He says, be there. Okay. We hung up, and I don't know what all happened that night, but the next day I went to work, and I came home, and my wife didn't forget that. And I didn't know that they had Al-Anon meeting the same night. But I went to this AA meeting, and like I say, this is in 1977, and thank God it's changed as far as the age. Because I was 22, 23, along in there, and at that meeting that I attended, you know, everybody there was old farts. You know, they were at the age that I am now. You know, God, they was in their 40s and almost 50. Here I am, 22. You know, give me 20 more years of good drinking, I'll come and see you guys. You know, I got no problem with that. But I was the youngest person there at that meeting. And I didn't feel comfortable at all, needless to say. But there was some things that was said at that meeting, and I don't remember a whole lot of them. But something did stick with me. You know, I've heard many times that if nothing else, Alcoholics Anonymous will kind of screw up your drinking. And that's true. Because one old boy told me, he got me after the meeting, and he said, you know, he says, I go to at least one meeting a week. Well, okay. You know, I can go to one meeting a week, I guess. And he started telling me how things had changed in his life. And okay, well, maybe I could use a little change. But most of all, the reason I wanted to keep going is that I knew Char was going to these Al-Anon meetings. So we went to them meetings for a while. And this particular clubhouse, the AAs kind of set out in one area, and then the Al-Anons had a little room. And there was a bench by this door, way to the back. And that's where I found myself sitting. I'd listen to them Al-Anons in there, and when I'd overhear kind of a laughter, I just knew that Char told him something funny about me. And then I'd hear him cry sometime. Oh, shit, am I going to be in trouble tonight? I know she told him something bad about me. You know, no self-centeredness in me, but I knew they had to be talking about me. You know, that's why you guys went to them meetings. So consequently, I was so worried about what she was doing that I didn't hear a whole heck of a lot that was going on my side. But I often thought that, you know, I kind of wish I'd have found Al-Anon before she did. Because, once again, my good thinking, you know, I found out that you people in Al-Anon could go to a meeting and still have maybe a drink once in a while. The meeting I went to, they said don't even have one drink. So I'd just soon kind of be in the inside door. I thought, now that wouldn't be so bad. But there's a lot more to that story. My wife and I, we used to go out, and she kind of get to the attitude where she had to join me. And I'd get so goddarn mad because her ice would dilute that drink every time. I just couldn't understand that. But anyway, in that period of time of going to these meetings there in 77 through 78, I guess it was about a year, 13 months or so, I never quit wanting to drink. And I heard these suggestions at the meeting, like get a sponsor and use them. And I heard that, these steps are put in order for a reason, and you should do them that way. And I heard things about, like, getting the higher power of your understanding and getting some faith. And somewhere in here, I didn't want any of that. I was going to do it my way. And I didn't need you people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't going to share with you my deepest part. After all, this great big God, this religious God that my mom had talked about, he'd taken away everything that was important to me anyway. There's no way I was going to trust him. And that's where I was with the higher power when I first came into this program. But I had another big dilemma came up in November of 1978. But I'll tell you something, though, before I get into that, I guess, is that there was some good things that came out of me that first go-around in the program, because this friend that had taken Char to her first Al-Anon meeting, her husband was just as bad as I was, and she was going to file for a divorce. And I was going to these meetings, and Char and I was getting along pretty good. And if you want to use a measuring stick compared to the way it was to, that one year, it was dang good. It wasn't worth a darn if you compare them to today. But at that time, we was getting along pretty good. Our sex life had came back quite a bit, and But anyway, I told this gentleman, I says, just come to these dadgum meetings. And I says, get on the good side of your wife and do some of these things. And I said, play along with the game and she won't divorce you. And I said, hell, eventually me and you'll be able to go out and get drunk again. And he took my advice. He went to them meetings, so I guess I did kind of do the first and maybe that 12th step a little bit. I didn't do any of them ones in the middle. That pertained to me. But I did help him get into the recovery program. And the funny thing about it is Mike dove in with both feet, and he worked hard. And he'd done the suggestions that you people gave him. And he hasn't had to have a drink since. But in 1978, in July, we had our third daughter. And in November of 1978, my mother was watching our kids at our house, and my wife and sister-in-law was at a volleyball game early in the morning. They played on this little league, and my mom was watching the kids, and Char came home with my sister-in-law, and my mom had died in my reclining chair in the living room of our house. And once again, I felt pain. I look back on it now because I have experienced death, close ones, since I've been in the program. But I look back on it now, and if I would have done some of the suggestions that you people gave me that first go-around, if I could have trusted a sponsor, if I could have trusted the higher power, I'd have had some place to go with that pain. But a lot of guilt set in. We buried Mom, and I had a lot of guilt for, my adolescent years and what I'd put her through and what my dad was, and she just didn't ever have much of a life. My brother, he was pretty successful, and I was kind of the black sheep, and I had a beautiful opportunity because I came into this program, and she was still alive, and I could have made such a beautiful amends to her, But I never took that opportunity. I never took that opportunity. I never used you people's suggestions. So after we buried her a short time, within about 3 months, the pain and this guilt and all this stuff was eating at me. I did find the wonderful use of some drugs outside of alcohol. And I know this isn't Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's part of me. But I found the use of them, and I found that, my wife would come up if I was a couple hours late, and she'd give me that Al-Anon sniff. We've all had them where their nostrils spread when they kiss you. And she couldn't smell no alcohol on me, but I was screwed up, and she couldn't figure it out. She didn't understand it neither. And I think after a period of time, she thought she was just married to a damn nut. Because here I was getting out here in the opium, and she couldn't smell no alcohol on me. Somewhere along, about 3 months after my mom passed away, I stopped at the club that I'd used to frequent, and I sat down there and I ordered a beer. And that first beer took me a long time to drink. A lot of the things I heard you people tell me was haunting me, but it didn't stop me. But they sure made that first one go down slow. But after I got that one down, I was back to the races. And then my problem was even compound. I not only was using alcohol, I was using drugs. And I deteriorated real quick, and our marriage deteriorated real quick, and the violence, I had gotten to where I was physical with my wife. And when Bill read that out of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous that today about us alcoholics always picking the right spouse, boy, I can relate to that. Because if the shoe would have been on this foot, I'd have been long gone. There's no doubt about it. But somehow, through her faith and determination and her support group, she stuck with a lot. But I was deteriorating quick, and when I think Patty was talking last night, the fear that she had of her father, that could have been one of my daughters up here talking, giving that same story. Because that's where drugs and alcohol had taken me. I thought it was cool that the kids never knew what kind of mood Dad would come home in, if I'd be happy, or if Mom would say the wrong things and we'd get in a fight. And I thought it was cool when I'd snap my finger at them little girls and they'd go running into their bedroom scared to death. Boy, was I a powerful sucker. That's where drugs and alcohol had taken me, to that level. Shar, on the other hand, was never that easy. She was a tough one. It even got to where she was violent to me. And here I was, this macho sucker, this hardcore guy. And any of you that's heard her story, it's true. Yes, she did run over me with a car. And one night, my buddies and I, we had closed the bar, and we decided it wasn't time to quit drinking, so we all went over to our house. And some of my friends had their guitars, and we was going to pick till the cows come home. And the kids were sleeping, and Char was sleeping. We come busting in at 1:30, and beer all over, and she comes stumbling out of the bedroom, and she's madder than hops. And I couldn't understand why. My friends and I were having fun. And the kids woke up, and she was angry. And she was sitting behind me in this chair, and I was sitting on a footstool. And boy, I'll tell you, there was 2 words that came out of my vocabulary real quick. But she was sitting there behind nagging, and all my friends were there, and I turned around, and it wasn't that bad. And I'm going to say them one time here. And I haven't said it much since that night. Maybe 2 or 3 times. But I called her a battle axe. Now, that ain't so bad, is it? But for some reason, that night, when I called her a battle axe, she really took offense to that. She hauled off and she kicked me in the back of my ribs. And a friend of mine told me much later, he says, "My God, Mark," he says, "I thought a shotgun went off." He says, "I've never heard anything pop like that." She broke some ribs. Here I am, my friends, they grabbed their guitar, they grabbed the booze, and out the door they went. I'm laying on the carpet, she's in bed, the kids are in bed, I can't crawl. And there is no way in hell I'm going to the doctor. Because I'd been in enough fights, they always ask what happened. I wasn't going to tell them my wife beat me up. I'm too much over that. So I taped myself all up, you know how you, ooh yeah. And I went to work. And everybody says, "What happened?" "Oh, I fell down on the stairs last night." Fell down on the stairs. By this time, all my buddies telling their buddies, "Jesus, shark kicked the shit out of Mark." I stopped down at the bar and everybody's saying, "Ha, what happened to you?" "Well, I fell down." "No, you didn't." God. Damn, that was bad. So when she talks about Al-Anon brutality, or I talk about it, I'm serious about it. It ain't no joke. But in the meantime, between that, Char kept going to meetings, and she was getting stronger, and she was getting more independent. She didn't need us, need me and need my attitude. And in that period of time, it had gotten to where a lot of them yets that I'd heard in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous was starting to happen. I was experiencing blackouts real regular, contemplating suicide real regular. I'd heard people say that they used to shake in the morning when they woke up, and that was happening. I had an alcoholic's dream for a job. I was kind of my own boss out in the shop. I'm a mechanic, and as long as I got the work done, nobody ever bothered me. The owners didn't bother me. So it was kind of an alcoholic's dream because I could keep a bottle locked up in my toolbox, and every time I couldn't hang on to that 9/16 wrench, I'd go take a little snort, and that'd calm me down to where I could make it through the day. And then when I got off work, the real partying started. And December 18th of 1981, I'd gotten a pretty good bonus from where I worked. And it just so happened that night, it was on a Friday night, and some friends had invited us over to their house for a little get-together. And my wife had arranged for a babysitter, and she was home getting all spruced up and dolled up. And like so many nights when I got off work, I really did have every intentions of just stopping at this watering hole for one. I really did. And I had a lot of money in my pocket because I'd cashed that bonus. And I sat down at that bar, and I ordered one, and pretty soon some friends came in, and you know the rest of the story. That's the Paul Harvey. Quite a few hours later, and a lot of drinks later, and a lot of dollars later, I stumbled home. And my wife was all dressed up, fit to be killed, and she was ready to kill me. And I came in, and it was different this time. She wasn't screaming, hollering, raising all this hell. But she told me she was done. And she had came to the end, and that it was over, and I was to leave, and that was it, and papers would be served, and that's the way it was going to be. And of course, I wasn't quite ready to give up. I was kind of in the arguing stage that night, I guess, and So some fighting went on, and did get a little bit ugly, and I started mixing some drinks pretty hard, and I went into I guess a blackout. But before I hit that blackout, the last thing I visibly remember was that, fine, I'll fix her. I'll just commit suicide. And I had this all planned. I was going to stop my pickup on the railroad tracks, and there's a train comes by our house about every 10 minutes, and bloop, it'd be all over. And really, seriously, that was my intentions when I left home. Somehow, from the grace of God, obviously that didn't happen. But what did happen is I woke up. It was December 18th or December 19th maybe by this time, but I woke up in this cockroach-infected motel room. And obviously I must have been cold when I walked in, and this thing had the old radiator heaters in it. I mean, this is a bad motel. And evidently I was cold, and I'd cranked that thing up, and it was real hot in there. And I woke up through my stupor about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was so bad, and it was so hot in that room, and the last thing I remember that I was going to do was commit suicide, and I thought I'd done it. I thought I was in hell. It was so hot, and I didn't recognize any of my surroundings. My God, I'd done it. And then my next thought was, oh no, I didn't do it. And I felt bad. And what I say, things don't just happen by accident. This guy that I had told that first go around, and that if he'd just come, maybe things would get better. He's the only guy that I could think of calling that morning. And somehow in my drunken stupor, I found his phone number and I called him. And he was planning a hunting trip with his dad. They was going pheasant hunting, and they was just leaving, like at sunup, like at 6, and this was like 4 or something. But they'd been planning this hunting trip for a lot of weeks, and his dad lived out of town, so it took quite an arrangement. But I called this guy, and Mike says, "Where are you?" And for the first time, I guess I didn't realize that I didn't know where I was for sure. And I looked out of this little old motel room, and I started identifying a few things, and I told him, and he says, "Okay, I think I know where you're at. What room you in?" I said, "Hell, I don't know. I had to go open up the door, see what room I was in." And within a short time, Mike was there. He gave up that hunting trip to help another alcoholic, and I'll never forget that. But they took me in their house, and of course, like I say, Char told me she was done with me, and they had no basement that wasn't finished. It was kind of a creepy little place. The old furnace set down there, and damn, it made a lot of noise when it kicked on. And I was jumpy and jiggery. And I went into DT's, and I seen things that I didn't think was ever possible for a human being to see. And I shook so bad that I couldn't keep on a pair of bedroom slippers. And his wife, God bless her, she had to wash the sheets every day because they were just yellow from sweat. But after a few short days and a lot of candy bars and a lot of love and a lot of talking, they thought I was strong enough that Mike took me down to treatment. And the only advice that Mike really gave me is he says, be like a sponge and absorb it all. And we went down to there, and I had this little drill sergeant named Tom. And he was a good counselor. And he was hard on me, and that's what I needed. But Tom didn't have a real high expectation of me. He wasn't sure whether I was going to make it or not. And somehow they had talked Char into coming down there in the last week or so, and they had told her that that marriage is much farther down the tube than ours had been salvaged if we both wanted it. And anyway, I guess she thought, well, I'll give it one more try again. And we walked out of there, and when I went back to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, I not only took some of the suggestions, I started using them, and I started trying to apply them to the best of my ability in every area of my life. And you know what, this program of Alcoholics Anonymous and what loving care of Al-Anons, and believe me, I love you Al-Anons, I really do. I make a lot of fun of you guys, but I tell you what, you saved my ass, and I mean that. Because, you know, without, you guys talk about tough love, I guess, in your program of recovery, and I am never going to be that well, I don't think. Because when I get so mad at something, there ain't no way it's tough love. I just completely want it out of my life. So my hat's off to you Al-Anons when you can say, you know, that tough love, and I don't know how you do it. But what this program has given our family is that same revolving door that I had way back when the friends used to come over and we used to party all the time. Well, it's kind of that same way in our recovery now. There's a lot of people that's at our house a lot of times. And we was just talking here a while back, you know, just every event or just 99% of the activities and things we do today is with recovery people. You know, that's some of the things that that I changed this go-around, and I am happy to say that I haven't found it necessary to use or drink since December 19th of 1981, and I'm grateful for that. But the gifts that this program's given me, myself, is we've got our family back, and since I've been in recovery, 2 out of our 3 daughters have been married, and they've wanted me to walk them down the aisle. You know, what a good feeling. We've got 3 grandkids, and they wanted Grandpa to be involved at the birth. What a feeling. Only possible through this program of recovery. The other night, our youngest grandson is 2 weeks old today? 2 weeks old tomorrow. 2 weeks old tomorrow. Last Tuesday, Grandpa got to babysit by himself a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 10-day-old one. And you know what? I done it. And I didn't have to drink. But them are the rewards. You know, when they talk about the promises in the big book, I've experienced each one of them at different times in my recovery. You know, I still have shiny motorcycle, but my crowd has changed. You know, I still go up to Sturgis, South Dakota during Bike Week. And yeah, granted, there is a lot of crazy stuff that goes on up there. But I found there's crazy stuff no matter where I want to go. It depends on if I recognize who I am today, you know. If I really believe that Mark's the alcoholic today, that's the important thing. I also found up there at Sturgis, South Dakota, that there's an AA clubhouse. And when I went up there a few years ago for the first time after I was clean, there wasn't too many motorcycles in that parking lot, because only AA or program people are supposed to park there. But I'll tell you what, how my heart goes and what a good feeling I have, and to know how this program's working, is I was up there about a month ago, and you know there's probably 500 motorcycles in that parking lot of that Alcoholics Anonymous in Sturgis, South Dakota. Supposed to be a party town. And you know, I've met people at them meetings from all over the world. And there's people that I only see once a year, and we meet up there. God, recovery is beautiful. You know, you can't soar with the eagles if you're going to run with the turkeys. And you know, the people in the program, you people are the eagles. Because you help me with my attitude. And that's the difference today, is my attitude. Just one other thing, you know, it's kind of funny how our language is just a little bit different than non-program people. But I want to tell you what happened this year. We was up to this bike week, and we happened to go to this event, and there was probably 5,000 people at this event. And I was sitting on my motorcycle, and this guy comes up right beside me, and we start talking. I'd never seen this guy, and you talk about things that happen. I'd never seen this guy in my life. And there's at least 5,000 people here, and it just happened. But we start talking, and just a few minutes I'm thinking, dang, I wonder if this guy's programmed, because he's talking my kind of talk, you know. And within about a half hour, I was dang sure. So I asked him, I says, hey, I says, I'm going to ask you a question. I says, are you a friend of Bill W.'s? And his eyes got big, and he got this big grin on his face, and I knew, because if you don't know Bill W., that you don't get that response. He says, well, yeah. He says, my wife is too, and he pointed at her, and she was a few motorcycles back, and he says, this is our first time up here at Sturgis being sober. And we talked, and we talked, and we talked, and we exchanged names. And we went down to the clubhouse and we talked. And a couple of weeks ago, one Saturday morning, I was sitting there at home, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's this guy. And we talk about a half hour, you know. But that's how this program works. I meet new people all the time. And you know, when I go back up there next year, he's a friend. You know, he's a friend. And we'll look forward to seeing each other. You know, that's what's neat about the program of recovery. We've got that bond. And I guess I've rattled long enough. I'm just so grateful, and you know, I wish I could say that everything's peachy and dory at our house, but you know, I've got a couple daughters that they've kind of taken after their dad, you know. And there again, you know, Shar says, hey, maybe you need an Al-Anon meeting, you know, to kind of handle with what's going on with the daughters. And, you know, I haven't darkened them doors yet. But let me tell you something. If I do, and I think I will, I'm sure I will, it's going to be for a heck of a lot different reason than what I thought way back when, you know. I'm not going in there because I think I can have a drink and still go to a meeting. I'm going in there to learn how to detach, and dang, I can't do that. You know, I just cannot detach when it comes to my kids. You know, I'm kind of like my mom. I want to fix them. You know, when they get in trouble, I've had youngest ones kind of had some run-ins here lately, and it's going to be real tough. You know, and Shar and I's talked a lot about it, and then in one moment I'm agreeing with her, and the next minute I'm saying, oh, I don't know. You know, but you know, all these slogans we hear, and one of them that I use a lot is, you know, especially when it's working with my kids, is if I'm going to pray, why worry? And if I'm going to worry, why pray? And I like that because it really gives me a measuring stick on where my faith is at. You know, it really measures where I'm at with my higher power today. So I'm just real grateful to be here and sober tonight, and thanks for bearing with me. Love you.